If you were still running the House of Representatives, would you have members back here on Monday to answer whatever takes place tonight?
Well, I think the Speaker is making the right call to get members back Sunday. Monday's going to be a long day, though, and the pressure has to build in order for the House to come to a reasonable conclusion. Time is a key element, and pressure is a key element to have a solid House vote, and the Speaker's managing that fairly well.
How are Republicans managing the rewriting of this DHS funding bill? We saw 5 Republican senators vote no on the package yesterday. Were you surprised by some of those names? It wasn't just Rand Paul, it's Mike Lee, it's Ted Budd, who joined us yesterday to talk about his philosophy here. Where is the Republican conference on restrictions for ICE?
Well, there are a couple things. So appropriations bills are a classic problem for Republicans to pass, because even if you're paring down government, you're still funding government.
Yes.
And there are a lot of policies that ride with government funding bills. So you look at those Republican senators voting no, they did it for a variety of different reasons, not ICE related primarily. And so that doesn't really speak to ICE or the current situation. It speaks to the overall challenge of funding the government as a limited government party, or an alleged limited government party. And so what is interesting right now, and I think is informative, is that deal-making occurred very quickly.
It did.
In response, we had the Senate take very quick action. A week's time in the Senate is like lightning speed.
No doubt.
And so they've come to a reasonable conclusion on how to keep the government open. And I think that should be commended. The deal making should be commended, and the response should be commended. And a reasonable set of governance initiatives are going to make their way through. And then the sticky stuff of how to fund DHS remains for the next.
So is 2 weeks enough? They've got a CR 2 weeks long. The president says there's a deal, but we've kind of seen this movie before. ACA subsidies.
No, we've seen this going back to when Speaker Boehner was negotiating with the Obama administration to fund DHS and the Obama administration's approach to immigration. So this is not new. What we did there was fund the government fully with an appropriations package and have a continuing resolution for DHS because we couldn't get agreement. We're having a similar situation here, but there is an idea within the Senate senators that are having cross-party conversations that they can come to a reasonable conclusion on a few policies that would enable a full funding for DHS for the remainder of the year. The timeline of 2 weeks seems crazy if you're in the market or if you're in the real world, but for Washington and for the legislative process on Capitol Hill, that is like saying we're going to have on Monday a deal. I mean, it's effectively working over the weekend to get a deal. So the condensed timeline is for the purpose of driving pressure to limit the number of policies that ride and to build consensus between the legislative branch, both parties, and the White House. So I think you're going to see next week, by Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, a deal come to fruition, or we're going to see disaster at DHS.
Wow, all right.
This, in order to fund the government, you're going to have a week-long process to actually.
So forget 2 weeks. This needs to be done next week.
Yes.
Can they do it without Chip Roy and members of the Freedom Caucus?
Yes. Well, I mean, if they can either be a constructive part of the conversation or they can be on the outside. The Senate procedures here will drive to a conclusion of 60 to 80 votes, probably 70 to 80 on a DHS funding mechanism. In the House, you can see a similar vote, but that would eliminate the far progressive left and those dissidents on the right that don't want to be a part of the legislative process.
Interesting. Should we start getting used to saying Chair Warsh?
I think what's interesting right now, and you just heard it, I mean, with your interview,
Elizabeth Warren says there shouldn't even be a hearing until this investigation is completed into Jay Powell.
Well, there are a couple issues. So let's before we get into Kevin Warsh, we have the issue of the president getting his appointees through the Senate Banking Committee. It is a very simple thing when you have the majority to get your nominees through the committee, because you have the votes, or the majority party has a majority in committees. But the majority in the Senate is narrow, so there's a one-vote majority by Republicans in the Senate Banking Committee. So then then the question is, where are the Republican senators on this to process any nominee for the Fed to the floor? You've interviewed Senator Tillis, my home state senator, who has expressed himself in very vocal terms that no nominee will get his vote until this Powell investigation ends. He means it. He's not running for re-election. There's nothing anyone can do to him in order to other than convince him, right? Or negotiate with him. They can't punish him in any way. He's leaving.
Right.
He's retiring. He's a liberated person. Like, he is one of the happiest people I know in Washington right now that holds any power. And he holds serious power in committee.
He does at the moment.
So you have to remedy that. I don't think Elizabeth Warren is a undecided vote here. I think she'll find any justification to vote no on any one of the president's nominees. Even Kevin Warsh, who was last in government as a George W. Bush Republican nominee and confirmed choice to the Fed.
Well, Democrats are calling him a flip-flopper. She says that he's changed his tune. He was a hawk, he's now a dove, and he's going to do anything the president asks him to do. She referred to whomever Donald Trump picks as a sock puppet. That's obviously not your view. But should there be a hearing before the investigation resumes? And I guess before you answer that, I asked the current chairman, the man who has your old job now, French Hill, about this today. He joined us earlier on Bloomberg. Can we hear what French Hill had to say? Let's watch and listen.
I hope that calmer heads will prevail on this investigation around Jay Powell, and that we don't have Warsh's nomination held up because of that. And I hope that the DOJ can more promptly review the data, review their decision, and take a final decision on their whether or not they're going to pursue the case. I just want people to know publicly this is, as I say, a distraction and could delay President Trump's own macroeconomic agenda.
Calls it a distraction, hopes calmer heads will prevail. Will this hasten an end to that investigation now that there's a pick?
I think so. And I think Senator Tillis's vote hastens the end to it. Not with the comments Elizabeth Warren made, but the vote of Thom Tillis and his relative position of actually being in the capacity of being a no or a yes. That gives him great wiggle room. But what you've heard from French Hill is a very sensible approach to the Federal Reserve vis-a-vis the legislative branch. But the eyes here are on Senate negotiations around nominees. That is always a delicate, bespoke process for any White House, but especially with this narrow majority in the U.S. Senate, and especially with a one-vote majority in the Senate Banking Committee.
Could we be in a world in which there's a hearing and then we wait for an investigation to end before we vote? Or how does this unfold for you?
I think that could happen. I think that, but I don't think you're likely to see the question put before the committee and it fail. I don't think that's in Republicans' interest. I don't think Senator Tillis would think that's wise. I don't think the White House would think it's wise.
Interesting.
This White House, interestingly enough, got all their nominees through to the cabinet, even the ones that looked the most challenged, even the ones that were so counter to the ideology, the stated ideology of the Congress and the White House. They made their way through a divided Senate. I think likewise we're going to see the president get his nominee Kevin Warsh through. I think we'll see we'll see the end of this investigation of the Federal Reserve, and I think we'll see a statement by the Supreme Court about the independence of the Fed. So at the end of the next 6 months, we're going to look back at a Federal Reserve more independent, more locked in its independency than it was before, regardless of the rhetoric among Democratic politicians on the Hill.
Does Jay Powell hang out for the rest of his time on the Fed? Because some have suggested he would never leave now to give President Trump the majority.
It's in his power, and this is power he possesses.
You know him better than most.
And what I would say is this, too, is a negotiation.
Interesting.
And it's in the art of the deal, if you want to say it that way.
Yeah, okay. We've got a lot to learn here still. By the way, Bloomberg News has confirmed what we were just discussing with the congressman. A vote in the House will take place Monday. So what happens here this evening is critically important with Senate votes underway right now. We've got less than a minute left. What's the speaker in for on Monday?
A rough day.
Yeah?
A rough day because the proposition for the House, they did the work to fund this. Events overtook them, and the Senate is railroading them. It does not feel good when all the action's in the Senate and you're riding shotgun.
How about that?
When you're riding shotgun, it means you're the crank yelling at the driver, right? And that is what has happened for the House in this. The deal making's been in the Senate. They've figured out a process that will prevail, and the president will sign this bill that the Senate's going to pass tonight. The House will deal with it, but it's always how that happens. It's a delicate piece for any speaker.